We've all got a shelf or two in our pantry where time seems to pause. A dusty can, a sealed jar, a bag that's outlived the calendar, and somehow we trust it. We trust the label, the packaging, the silence of time. Supermarkets lean into that comfort. Products that boast no expiration, no spoilage, no risk. Foods we're told can last forever. But that word, forever, carries a few unspoken trade-offs. Some of these items truly are marvels of preservation. Others, not so much. They last because they were never truly alive to begin with. No moisture, no enzymes, no spoilable value. And sometimes, what's missing matters more than what's inside. Because when a food never expires, it usually means something else has been stripped away. Nutrients, freshness, or even flavor. This isn't a warning, it's a recalibration. If you're stocking up, you deserve to know which forever foods earn their place, and which ones only pretend to. Stay with this. The truth's on the shelf. Subscribe for more quiet truths in a loud food world. Number 1. Pickling lime, calcium hydroxide. You won't find it in the pasta aisle or next to the boxed meals. In fact, most American pantries have never heard of it, but tucked away in canning sections, survivalist catalogs, and old Southern cookbooks is a powder with serious shelf power. Pickling lime, also known as calcium hydroxide. At first glance, it's not even food, just a fine white powder in a plastic tub. But this mineral compound, when mixed with water, transforms perishables into shelf-stable legends. For generations, it's been used to preserve eggs in water glass jars, firm up cucumbers in pickles, and even process corn into masa in traditional nixtamalization. And unlike most kitchen ingredients, this one doesn't go bad. Kept dry and sealed, pickling lime can last indefinitely. The trick is, most modern shoppers don't know what it's for. In grocery stores, it sits quietly, if it's stocked at all. Yet it's FDA approved for food use and can be a critical tool for off-grid preservation, especially when refrigeration fails. Here's the catch. It must be food grade. The same chemical is also sold at hardware stores for gardening or masonry, and those versions are not safe to eat. Only lime labeled for pickling or culinary use is suitable for storage plans. Think of it like a toolbox item, not a meal. It's like keeping yeast or vinegar on hand. You don't eat it directly, but it opens up a whole world of food that can last. The hidden power of pickling lime is that it makes other foods more shelf-stable, not by changing their flavor, but by locking in structure, texture, and safety. And in a long-term pantry, that flexibility is gold. If you're stocking with strategy, don't overlook this powder. It's not glamorous, but it works quietly, chemically, and without an expiration date. Number 2. Instant potato flakes. Pure dehydrated, not mashed mix. Most people pass them without a glance. Those stiff cardboard boxes on the bottom shelf, often marked instant mashed. But hidden behind the marketing is a pantry sleeper. Pure dehydrated potato flakes. And when they're made without added fats or flavorings, they can last not just months, but years. The shelf appeal is subtle. Lightweight, compact, and easy to portion, these flakes rehydrate into soft potatoes with just hot water. But the real reason they deserve a spot in long-term storage isn't convenience, it's chemistry. When made purely from cooked, dried potatoes, they contain almost no moisture, and moisture is what makes most foods spoil. Here's where many shoppers get misled. Most commercial instant mashed potatoes sold in the US include dairy, margarine powders, or seasoning blends. These extras slash the shelf life dramatically. What you want instead is a plain variety, often sold in bulk sections, survival kits, or specialty food supply stores. It's the difference between potato powder that lasts a year and one that lasts a decade. Stored in a cool, dry place, ideally in Mylar or vacuum-sealed packaging, Pure Flakes can quietly outlast fresh produce, frozen food, and even many canned goods. It's not fancy, it's not fresh, but in a long-haul pantry, simple starch that won't spoil is a smart play. Number 3. Powdered vegetable broth, no added oils. On most grocery shelves, broth is a liquid. It lives in boxes, cans, or freezer bags, often perishable, sometimes shelf-stable, but always bulky. Powdered vegetable broth doesn't get the same spotlight, yet it might be one of the most space-efficient, long-lasting, and quietly powerful pantry staples you can stock. The appeal is simple. Deep, savory flavor, zero spoilage, and a shelf life that stretches well beyond the printed date. But not all broth powders are created equal. Many commercial versions, especially the ones sold in bouillon cube form, are packed with palm oil, maltodextrin, artificial flavoring, and staggering amounts of sodium. These additives not only compromise the ingredient quality, but also reduce the product's shelf stability over time. What most people don't realize is that the cleanest, longest-lasting powdered broths are the ones with the fewest ingredients: dried vegetables, sea salt, and herbs. No oils, no milk solids, no preservatives. That's the real trick. Oils go rancid. Dairy shortens lifespan. Even natural flavors flavorings can break down. So while a box might look shelf-stable, it's the absence of fats that makes certain broths endure. Properly stored in airtight containers away from humidity, clean powdered broth can last 5 to 10 years without losing much potency. And in that time, it can stretch a plain rice meal into something nourishing. It can flavor beans, rehydrate dried vegetables, or add comfort in a survival situation. Think of it as portable umami, a dry, weightless insurance policy for soups, stews, and everything in between. For those building a pantry with purpose, powdered broth isn't just a seasoning, it's a foundation. Quiet, compact, and when chosen carefully, built to last. Number 4, bee pollen granules. Tucked beside the honey or buried in the supplement aisle, bee pollen granules rarely catch a shopper's eye. They're small, speckled, and often labeled like a vitamin. But for those who understand long-term storage, bee pollen is more than a health trend. It's a forgotten staple with serious shelf life. Collected by bees as a protein-rich food source, these tiny granules are actually compact packets of enzymes, amino acids, and micronutrients. In raw form, they're often refrigerated, but when dried properly and sealed, bee pollen can last for years in cool, dark storage, making it one of the most nutrient-dense items in a prepper's arsenal. Most people think of it as a smoothie booster or energy food. What they don't realize is how stable it becomes once moisture is removed. Unlike fresh pollen or syrup-based blends, dried bee pollen doesn't spoil easily. There's no water to attract mold, no fats to oxidize, just pure, dry biological material, and bees have been using it to survive winters for centuries. That said, not all granules on the market are equal. Some are flash-dried, others are air-dried slowly. The latter preserves more enzymes but also requires airtight packaging to prevent spoilage, and many store brands add sugar or mix with royal jelly, ingredients that lower shelf life significantly. Stored correctly, bee pollen becomes more than a supplement. It becomes a fallback protein. A small spoonful can enhance grains, enrich baked goods, or even be eaten as is in times of scarcity. It's like nature's multivitamin, preserved in granule form. And when sealed in mylar, glass, or vacuum packs, it outlasts many traditional pantry items by years. In most kitchens, it's treated as optional. In smart storage plans, it quietly earns its place, not with volume, but with value. Number 5, dry Masa Harina, lime-treated corn flour. It looks like just another bag of cornmeal, pale yellow, fine-grained, often shoved to the bottom shelf. But dry Masa Harina holds a nutritional edge and a shelf-life secret that sets it apart. This isn't just ground corn, it's nixtamalized corn, a process that turns a simple grain into something far more enduring and digestible. Masa Harina starts with dried corn soaked in pickling lime, calcium hydroxide, which loosens the hull, boosts its mineral availability, and unlocks niacin, a vitamin lost in standard cornmeal. Once cooked, dried, and finely ground, the result is a flour that's naturally resistant to spoilage. And when stored in airtight packaging, it can last years without losing its function or flavor. Most shoppers use it for tortillas or tamales, but its long-term value lies in what it doesn't contain. No added oils, no dairy powders, no preservatives, just one ingredient, treated corn. That simplicity is what gives it strength on the shelf. The catch? Exposure to air kills its lifespan. Left open, Masa absorbs moisture and odors, leading to rancidity or pest infestation. That's why commercial bags, once opened, should be immediately transferred to mylar bags or vacuum-sealed jars with oxygen absorbers. Done right, it can easily last 5 to 10 years in storage. In contrast, many cornmeal products in American stores are enriched or blended with wheat, ingredients that shorten shelf life and reduce versatility. Masa Harina remains gluten-free, nutrient-dense, and more resilient in long-haul scenarios. It's a quiet powerhouse, a foundational starch that cooks fast, fuels well, and stores deep. And for households looking beyond white rice or pasta, it offers cultural flexibility and nutritional staying power. It may not look like much on the shelf, but with proper storage, Masa Harina earns its place as a prepper essential. Number 6, canned octopus in olive oil. It's not a pantry regular for most American households. In fact, it's the kind of thing many can glance at, hesitate over, and move past. But for those building a shelf-stable stockpile that goes beyond basics, canned octopus, particularly in olive oil, deserves serious attention. Here's why. While canned tuna and sardines dominate the long shelf-life protein category, octopus offers a richer nutrient profile, firmer texture, and far less mercury per ounce. And when packed in olive olive oil, it gains an extra layer of protection, fat-based insulation that helps preserve both flavor and freshness without refrigeration. What most shoppers don't realize is that the olive oil isn't just for taste. It acts as a sealant, limiting air contact and oxidation. That's why these cans often carry shelf lives of 5 years or more, even without preservatives. And unlike water-packed seafood, the oil helps maintain tenderness and reduces the metallic flavor that plagues many long-stored proteins. But as always, there's a catch. Not all brands are created equal. Some U.S. imports, especially lower-cost ones, use vegetable oil blends instead of real olive oil. Others add stabilizers or use smaller species that shrink in quality over time. The best options tend to come from Spain or Portugal, where canning seafood is an art, not just a preservation method. There's also the lining question. Some cans still use BPA-based materials, even if not disclosed. Look for brands that clearly label BPA-free packaging or choose glass-jarred versions when possible. Canned octopus is compact, calorie-dense, and surprisingly versatile. It can be eaten cold, warmed into stews, or added to rice dishes. And in a world where protein is often heavy, frozen, or short-lived, this little can quietly deliver on all fronts. In smart storage, it's not just about what lasts, it's about what stays useful. Canned octopus might not be familiar, but it's one of the most resilient proteins on the shelf, and one of the most quietly powerful. Number 7. Powdered buttermilk. Cultured, no fat added. Tucked away on the highest shelf of the baking aisle, powdered buttermilk is easy to miss, and even easier to underestimate. It's not flashy, it's not trendy, and most shoppers don't realize it exists until a biscuit recipe calls for it. But for long-term storage, this humble powder quietly earns its spot. Unlike liquid buttermilk, which spoils within weeks, powdered buttermilk is shelf-stable for years, sometimes even longer if kept airtight and cool. The reason is simple. Fat-free, cultured skim milk can be dried without risk of rancidity. And when fats are left out of the process, what remains is a tangy, high-functioning powder with real staying power. Most people associate it with pancakes or baked goods, but its usefulness runs deeper. Powdered buttermilk adds acidity to doughs, helps with leavening, and can even double as a marinade base in dry rubs. And when rehydrated, it can sub in for the real thing in dressings, dips, and batters. But here's the fine print. Not all brands are equal. Many U.S. options sold in bulk include additives to prevent clumping, like calcium silicate or modified starches. These don't ruin shelf life, but they can affect flavor and solubility. The cleanest versions are labeled cultured buttermilk powder with just 1 or 2 ingredients. Stored in a sealed Mylar bag or vacuum-sealed jar, this powder can outlast many boxed or canned dairy alternatives. But once opened, it draws in moisture quickly, so splitting large containers into smaller, airtight portions is key. For anyone stocking strategically, it's the quiet solution to a dairy dilemma: how to keep flavor, function, and fermentation without refrigeration. Powdered buttermilk won't make headlines, but it does make everything else work better, longer. Number 8. Arrowroot powder, natural thickener. It's one of those quiet ingredients, not flashy, not mass-marketed, and rarely stocked in bulk. But arrowroot powder has a quiet reputation among chefs, herbalists, and food preservers alike. And for anyone thinking in shelf-stable terms, it's far more than a cornstarch alternative. It's a pantry insurance policy with staying power. Derived from the roots of the Maranta plant, arrowroot powder is prized for its ability to thicken sauces, soups, and puddings without changing their flavor. It works at lower temperatures than cornstarch, dissolves easily, and doesn't turn gloppy when reheated. But what makes it remarkable for storage isn't just function, it's purity. Arrowroot is almost always sold as a single-ingredient product. No anti-caking agents, no hidden oils, no preservatives. That simplicity gives it an unusually long shelf life, often 5 years or more when sealed correctly. And unlike cornstarch, which can absorb ambient odors and degrade in humid conditions, arrowroot holds up better in high heat or unstable environments. The problem? Most American kitchens don't use it, or confuse it with tapioca starch. While both are white powders with similar uses, they come from entirely different plants. Arrowroot has a cleaner finish and is easier to digest, especially for people avoiding corn or processed thickeners. In grocery stores, it's often sold in small tubs or health food aisles and marked up as a natural option. But for preppers, it's not about marketing, it's about reliability. Sealed in a dry, airtight container, arrowroot doesn't spoil, doesn't settle, and doesn't lose strength. It won't feed a family on its own, but it can turn thin rations into something hearty. It can bind, stretch, and finish meals when other options are gone. In short, it's a small ingredient with oversized value, exactly what smart storage should be built on. Number 9. Textured vegetable protein, TVP from soy. It doesn't look like much, dry, crumbly flakes in a plain bag, often sitting in the bulk bin or health food aisle. But textured vegetable protein, better known as TVP, is one of the most calorie-dense, long-lasting plant proteins available in the U.S. food system. And for shelf-stable storage, it offers more than meets the eye. TVP is made by extracting the oil from soybeans and puffing the defatted meal into chunks or granules through a high-heat extrusion process. The result is a dehydrated product that, once rehydrated, mimics the texture of ground meat. It absorbs flavor easily, cooks quickly, and, more importantly, has no water content, which makes it remarkably shelf-stable. Unflavored, fat-free TVP can last 10 years or more when sealed properly. It's lightweight, affordable, and nutritionally dense, often containing 40–50% protein by weight. That makes it one of the most space-efficient ways to store protein without refrigeration. But what most people don't realize is that not all TVP is equal. Many versions sold in supermarkets are pre-seasoned or include small amounts of fat or sugar to enhance taste. These reduce shelf life significantly, and others are fortified with synthetic vitamins or additives that can degrade over time. If you're stocking for longevity, the safest bet is plain, unflavored TVP from a trusted source, ideally packaged in oxygen-free, Mylar-sealed containers. Once opened, it needs to stay dry, as it's highly absorbent and will spoil quickly if exposed to moisture or heat. TVP isn't glamorous. It's not whole food, and it's not fresh. But when protein options run thin, it becomes a lifeline, scalable, dependable, and built to last. For anyone building a practical emergency pantry, TVP isn't filler, it's a strategy. Number 10. Vacuum-sealed fermented black garlic. At first glance, it looks like it's gone bad. Soft, blackened cloves wrapped in papery skins. But this isn't rot. It's black garlic, a fermented version of regular garlic that's been aged under controlled heat and humidity. The result? A product that's not only shelf-stable, but deeply flavorful, and surprisingly underutilized in long-term storage. Fermented black garlic has been prized in Asian kitchens for centuries, but it's only recently entered mainstream American grocery stores. With a sweet, molasses-like taste and sticky texture, it behaves more like a soft-dried fruit than a raw bulb. And when vacuum-sealed in proper packaging, it can last well over a year without refrigeration, far longer than fresh garlic, which often molds or dries out within weeks. The science behind it is simple. During fermentation, natural sugars and amino acids in the garlic break down and rearrange through the Maillard reaction, the same browning process that gives seared meats their flavor. This not only changes its taste, but also lowers its pH and water activity, both of which make it inhospitable to spoilage. But here's what most shoppers miss. Packaging matters. Many brands sell black garlic in resealable bags, which are fine for short-term use but won't hold up for long storage. Look instead for vacuum-sealed bricks or jars with moisture barriers, especially those labeled with a production date. Black garlic isn't just a gourmet item. In lean meals, it becomes a flavor bomb, transforming beans, rice, or soups with deep umami richness. It adds complexity without salt, sugar, or fat, and it takes up almost no space. In the world of shelf-stable foods, few items pack this much flavor into such a small footprint. Black garlic isn't loud, but it lasts, and it elevates everything around it. Number 11. Canned green jackfruit. At first glance, it looks like a fruit, and it is. But in its young, unripe form, canned green jackfruit behaves more like a vegetable or meat substitute. It's soft, neutral in flavor, and takes on the taste of whatever it's cooked with. But what sets it apart in long-term storage isn't its culinary versatility, it's its durability. Canned green jackfruit, especially in brine or water, can last on shelves for 5 years or more. Sealed in BPA-free cans and stored in cool, dark conditions, it doesn't spoil, rot, or lose texture. It's often marketed toward vegans and vegetarians as a pulled pork alternative, but few shoppers realize how shelf-stable it truly is. The key is that it's packed before ripening. Ripe jackfruit is sweet, sticky, and perishable, but unripe jackfruit is starchy, fibrous, and bland, which makes it ideal for preservation. With no sugars to ferment and no fats to oxidize, it holds up under heat and time. That said, not all canned versions are equal. Some brands, especially lower-cost imports, add preservatives like calcium chloride or citric acid that can alter the flavor. Others pack in flavored sauces that reduce shelf life. The cleanest and longest-lasting options contain just 3 ingredients: jackfruit, water, and salt. And while it doesn't provide complete protein like beans or meat, it does offer fiber, volume, and bulk, key traits in a food crisis or extended pantry rotation. It fills the plate, stretches sauces, and brings a familiar texture to plant-based meals. Think of it like like tofu, not flavorful on its own, but endlessly flexible. In tacos, stir-fries, curries, or stews, it becomes whatever the dish needs. In a pantry where most meat alternatives are frozen or processed beyond recognition, canned green jackfruit stands quietly on the shelf, stable, simple, and surprisingly resilient. Number 12, Sriracha powder or fermented chili dust. In American kitchens, spice usually comes in bottles. We squeeze hot sauce, shake chili flakes, or stir in spoonfuls of paste. But when it comes to shelf life, liquid heat doesn't last nearly as long as its powdered form. That's where Sriracha powder, or better yet, fermented chili dust, quietly outperforms its bottled cousins. Sriracha powder isn't just dehydrated hot sauce. The good versions are made from fermented red chilies, salt, and garlic, all dried slowly and ground into a fine, shelf-stable powder. Unlike the iconic hui fong sauce, which relies on vinegar and preservatives to stay stable, the powdered form contains no moisture and no additives. That means it stores longer, travels lighter, and doesn't lose potency as quickly. The advantage isn't just in heat, it's in control. A single pinch of fermented chili powder can flavor an entire meal without introducing sugar, vinegar, or water. And in a pantry setting, where flavor fatigue can set in quickly, that kind of compact, concentrated taste becomes priceless. But here's the issue. Not all chili powders are fermented. Most store-brand chili powder in the US is actually a spice blend, often including cumin, oregano, and even flour. These blends are meant for chili, not for heat. True fermented chili dust is typically imported or found in specialty spice shops and comes with just 1 or 2 ingredients. Stored in a dark, dry container, ideally glass or vacuum sealed, it can last upwards of 5 years without clumping or fading. And unlike hot sauces, it doesn't depend on refrigeration once opened. In emergency prep or long-term storage, it's more than a luxury. It's a morale booster, a flavor anchor, a way to make bland starches taste like real meals again. When food becomes functional, spice becomes emotional. Fermented chili powder earns its place not by what it adds in calories, but by what it rescues in flavor. Number 13, full-fat cocoa powder, unopened, alkalized. It doesn't scream emergency food, but it should. Tucked into baking aisles and often forgotten after the holidays, full-fat cocoa powder is one of the most underrated, long-lasting items in the American pantry, especially when it's alkalized, or Dutch processed, and stored unopened. It's built to endure. Cocoa powder is what remains after most of the cocoa butter is extracted from fermented, roasted cacao beans. The remaining solids are ground into a fine powder packed with antioxidants, flavor compounds, and a modest dose of caffeine. When it's alkalized, the acidity is neutralized, which gives it a smoother, richer taste and improves its shelf life. Unopened and stored in a cool, dark place, full-fat cocoa powder can last 5 to 10 years with minimal loss of quality. And because it's a dry product with no added sugars or dairy, it's remarkably stable. It won't rot, spoil, or attract pests if kept airtight. But here's the catch. Most cocoa powders on U.S. grocery shelves are heavily processed, defatted, or blended with sugar. Instant mixes, hot cocoa packets, and baking blends often include milk solids, starches, or preservatives, all of which shorten shelf life dramatically. For long-term use, the best option is pure, full-fat, alkalized cocoa with just one ingredient, cocoa powder. Look for products in tins or vacuum-sealed pouches and avoid those in paper bags or resealable plastic containers. Stored right, cocoa powder is more than flavor. It's a morale asset. A spoonful can turn powdered milk into comfort food, elevate baked goods, or simply make water taste like something again. In a pantry built for endurance, taste matters too. Cocoa might not be a necessity, but when the weeks stretch long, it can feel like one. Number 14, Vital Wheat Gluten. It's not a flour, not a supplement, and not something most home cooks know how to use. But Vital Wheat Gluten, the pure protein extracted from wheat flour, is one of the most powerful, shelf-stable tools in long-term food storage. And once you understand what it does, it becomes hard to leave out. Vital Wheat Gluten is what remains after the starch is washed out of wheat dough. What's left is a fine, pale powder that's nearly 80% protein and almost entirely void of fat or moisture. Two things that typically shorten a food's shelf life. Sealed properly, it can last 7 to 10 years without refrigeration, making it one of the most durable proteins you can store without a freezer. But the value goes beyond nutrition. When added to regular flour, even in small amounts, it improves elasticity, rise, and structure, making it essential for bread making in a low-resource kitchen. It's also the key ingredient in homemade seitan, a meat substitute that's been used for centuries in East Asian cuisine. Here's what most people miss. Packaging matters. Many Many grocery store versions come in simple paper bags, which offer little protection against humidity or pests. For real shelf life, vital wheat gluten needs to be transferred into airtight containers, ideally vacuum-sealed or packed with oxygen absorbers. It's also easy to confuse with high gluten flour, which still contains starch and spoils faster. True vital wheat gluten is almost pure protein, and it's labeled that way, usually in specialty baking sections or natural food stores. In a long-haul pantry, where plant protein is hard to store without refrigeration, this powder plays a quiet but essential role. It strengthens meals, stretches flour, and turns basic ingredients into something closer to a full meal. It won't feed you alone, but it will make your food work harder, last longer, and rise stronger. Number 15. Dried seaweed sheets, nori or wakame. It weighs almost nothing, costs just a few dollars, and takes up barely any space. But dried seaweed, especially nori and wakame, is one of the smartest, most overlooked shelf-stable foods you can stock. Behind its whisper-thin form lies a rare combination of mineral density, flavor concentration, and true long-haul storage potential. Seaweed is naturally designed for preservation. Once harvested and dried, it contains virtually no moisture, the #1 enemy of shelf life. In sealed packaging, it can last for 5 years or more without refrigeration. And unlike many health foods with complicated processing, most seaweed sheets contain just one ingredient, seaweed. Nori, the paper-like variety used in sushi, can be eaten dry or toasted, crumbled over rice, or rehydrated into soups. Wakame, more common in miso and seaweed salads, expands dramatically when soaked and adds texture and iodine-rich flavor to broths or grains. Both provide trace minerals like iodine, magnesium, and calcium, nutrients that can be hard to find in shelf-stable diets. But here's where it gets tricky. Storage conditions are everything. While the product itself is stable, seaweed is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air. Left open or exposed to humidity, it becomes soft, stale, and eventually mold-prone. That's why it's often sold in individually sealed packs or foil-wrapped multi-packs with desiccant pouches. Many U.S. shoppers only encounter seaweed as a snack, those salty, oil-brushed chips that expire quickly. But pure, unflavored seaweed sheets are a different product entirely. They don't rely on preservatives or added fat, and when kept dry and cool, they're as stable as any grain or legume. It's not calorie-dense, it won't fill your belly, but it fills a critical gap in most long-term pantries: micronutrients and flavor. A few flakes in a bland bowl of rice or beans can transform the meal, and in low-resource scenarios, that kind of transformation matters. Dried seaweed isn't loud or bulky, it's light, quiet, and deeply functional. The kind of food that doesn't just last, it lifts what's around it. And that's exactly what a smart shelf should be built on. At first glance, shelf-stable foods look like a compromise, a trade-off between freshness and function. But as we've seen, longevity doesn't always mean low quality. Some of the most enduring pantry items aren't synthetic, preserved, or processed beyond recognition. They're simply dry, simple, and quiet. We tend to think of food as something that should be cold, moist, or soft to be real. But preservation doesn't erase value. When it's done without additives, it can actually protect it. What lasts isn't just what's packaged well. It's what's made well, stored smart, and stripped down to what matters. Of course, no pantry is perfect. Stocking for the long haul means balancing calories with nutrition, shelf life with taste. But understanding the why behind what lasts and what doesn't is the first step towards stocking with clarity, not just quantity. Because the goal isn't just to survive on what we store, it's to rely on what we trust. And in a world of noise, quiet foods that endure might be the smartest investment we can make. Subscribe for more calm, clear food truths and share with someone who stocks with purpose.